My name is Victoria Gordon, and I'm the acting director of the Athena Center for Leadership Studies here at Barnard. I am delighted to be kicking off our first Power Talk of the season. Our Power Talks are designed to bring senior women leaders from diverse fields and industries here to Barnard to share their stories with our students, with our staff, with our community, and to engage in a meaningful conversation around women in leadership. So thank you for joining us. Before I introduce our guests this evening, I just want to say thank you to my staff, the entire team, events management, Aramark, and everybody. It really is a team effort, everything we do here. A special plug to Mulaney and the Mujeres Barnard student group here, who, they're our co-sponsors for this event. So just thank you to everyone involved who helped bring this event to life. Also, quick plug for some upcoming events that we have here at Barnard. On Monday, we're doing an event with Professor Michael Miller, who's a professor of political science, about the upcoming midterm elections and what political scientists think we can expect to see. So it should be interesting. It'll be here in the Oval. It's a free event. So come on, bring your friends. And then our next Power Talk of the season is going to be November 7th in the James Room on the 4th floor, and we'll be featuring Athena Distinguished Fellow Liza Donnelly, who is a cartoonist and a journalist, and she'll be just talking to us about gender and humor and how that all works together. Also, shameless plug for the Athena Film Festival. Please save the date. It is February 28th to March 3rd. Tickets go on sale in January, but please visit athenacenter.barnard.edu to sign up for the newsletter and stay in touch with us for upcoming events. So tonight, our featured guest this evening is Nathalie Molina Niño. She's the CEO of Brava Investments and also the author of LEAPFROG, the new revolution for women entrepreneurs, which is available for sale outside, so make sure you pick up a copy before you leave and get Nathalie to sign it. Nathalie also worked extremely closely with the founding director of the Athena Center for Leadership Studies, Catherine Colbert, to found the Entrepreneurs at Athena program here at Barnard. So she is a tech entrepreneur and author and an all-star. So we're delighted to have her here to share her story, share a little bit about her book and the origin story behind it with us. And then I'm delighted to welcome Barnard student, Athena scholar, and co-president of the Mujeres student group, Mulaney Palacios Delgado, here to moderate our talk tonight. So thank you all for coming and enjoy.
Thank you guys all for coming. My name is Mulaney Palacios, and welcome to our first Power Talk tonight for the semester in honor of Latinx Heritage Month. We're joined today by the fabulous Nathalie Molina Niño, who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago when I interned at her company, Brava Investments. We worked on an array of projects, one of them being this one right here, LEAPFROG, the new revolution for women entrepreneurs, which actually got started here. Nathalie worked here while she was a student at Columbia, and she founded the Center for Women Entrepreneurs here at Athena. She got this baby going, and so tonight we're just going to talk about how it got started, your background, which is not entrepreneurship but tech, and how your identities have shaped this book and your vision for the world and getting to gender parity. So thank you.
Thank you. No pressure here. First time we have a student, yes, moderating a Power Talk. I love it. Moderating somebody who moderated a Power Talk. I can't remember who I moderated for. Minerva Tantoko, that's right, the Athena Fellow. Minerva Tantoko, the first CTO of New York City. It's amazing to be here. You know, any excuse that I have to come back, I take. And this is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and this is actually one of my favorite rooms in the whole world. It's one that I probably was in and held multiple meetings in before I actually did the thing that maybe a more, present person would do, which is after I think like the third meeting here, I finally looked around and realized, holy crap, these are all women.
One man.
But for one. But it's pretty awesome. I just chalked it up as like your typical sort of, East Coast sort of stodgy meeting room. And then it was all women, which is a big part of my experience here at Athena. It's just always having to give things a second look and realizing that everything is a little more spectacular than you realized.
Yeah. And on that note, something that we don't realize also is that this book, all the proceeds will be going to Vote Run Lead, an organization that was also started here, incubated at Athena, and that is basically an incubator for women in the political sphere. It preps them for running for office. Stacey Abrams, up and coming, maybe, most likely,
Future
Georgia
governor of Georgia.
Was a product of the organization. And so all of the proceeds will be going to that organization, just so that we can speed up the dial and really get to gender parity. But, more on that now.
Absolutely. Our Erin Velarde, was part of the Athena Center for a while there. And she and I were actually just starting at the Athena Center at the same time. And it was around that time that we were fortunate enough to get Marie Wilson to become a fellow of the center. And Marie Wilson, is the founder of the White House Project. And it was around that time that, unfortunately, the White House Project was shut down, which was gut-wrenching for a lot of us. Not the least of which is Marie Wilson. This was her legacy. And a board decided that it was time to shut it down. And what happened was that Erin Velarde had worked under Marie Wilson, had started the single most successful project of the White House Project, which was called Vote, Run, Lead. It was a program. And it was a program that, set women up to be successful at running for office. And in fact, it's the program in this country that has put more women, and specifically women of color, into elected office than any other. And so the concern was, as we were, sitting at the Athena Center wanting to cry about the death of the White House Project, was it cannot go down with the sinking ship. We have to salvage something. And, Erin, being Erin, said, I'm going to do it. And so she went to the board. She asked them for permission to take the program and revitalize it and give it a new life as its own organization. And then she founded Vote, Run, Lead, the organization, inspired by Vote, Run, Lead, the program. And now I would say my company is 2 years old. Vote, Run, Lead is probably older because she got started before I did, so maybe about 3 years old. Has gotten sponsorship from everyone from Target to all sorts of big corporates, is working with me in partnership with the United State of Women, which is a program that came out of the Obama White House as part of the Council on Women and Girls. We collaborate all the time. I will say this, I got heat for that decision. I had...
Why? It's common sense, isn't it?
No. It was actually really shocking to me that even people within my own community, people that you probably know. By the way, how many people in this room are in the book? And yes, it counts if you're in the acknowledgments. Or featured in the book, or worked on the book. Raise your hands. Okay, so we've got a lot of family in the room. So people in my community, not the ones who raised your hands, had a hard time because they said, look, if you're going to give proceeds of the book to a nonprofit of some kind, why don't you give it to somebody affiliated with entrepreneurship? It's a book about entrepreneurs, for women entrepreneurs. Why would you mix politics in with entrepreneurship? You're just going to muddy the waters. Especially at such a polarized time, why don't you stick your nose out of politics and stick to your swim lane, which was essentially the message that I was getting. And I got it from 1 or 2 people, and I didn't worry. And then I got it from 3 or 4 people. And then I started to get a little more worried. And then I got it from over 10 people.
And then you wrote the Forbes article about it.
Yes. Then I wrote a rant that turned into a speech that turned into a Forbes article that's gotten over 50,000 views. And it's basically taking inspiration from Shirley Chisholm and her quote that says, and I will butcher it, I might get it wrong, but many of you I'm sure know it, is that the rent we pay for living on this earth is the rent we pay for living on this earth. And I took that and I twisted it a little bit. Sorry, Shirley Chisholm. But what I said was getting women elected is the rent we, women entrepreneurs, pay for making money. And for anybody that doesn't see that connection, for anybody thinks that thinks that I write books like this or that people who care about this issue are out there giving speeches about empowering women economically, thinking that I'm just doing it so that we can buy some nice bags, you're mistaken. The entire point, and if anybody has forgotten this point, then we've forgotten our true north, right? The entire point of putting money into the wallets of women is so that we can change the power structure, and there is no other better way, I think, than entrepreneurship and politics and getting women elected. And so, but it's interesting because I did have to make that connection, and you're right, I think it's obvious. But I think that we have, one of the quiet ways of getting women to play small is to remind them to stay in their swim lane, right? And so that's been an interesting process just with the book.
Yeah, and so if you haven't checked it out, check it out. What is it called? Remind me, the Forbes article?
It's a quote from Nellie Galan, who was also a fellow of the center, who also did a power talk here, saying, "We are our own Prince Charming."
Yes, that is it.
Yeah.
That is it, guys. Check it out when you can. And with that, let's dive right in. You talked about how this book was basically incubated here at Athena and Barnard. But let's talk about a little bit back, because you come from tech. You left tech and came here. Tell us about your personal experiences. How and when did they influence your thinking about gender and entrepreneurship and really motivated you to get involved in striving for gender parity?
Late, I would say. Although I grew up with feminist parents, which I'm South American, I'm half Ecuadorian, half Colombian. Grew up in LA. Definitely grew up with parents who said you could do whatever you wanted, however you wanted. So I had a really empowering, sort of childhood, I would say. And so it just never occurred to me that I couldn't be in tech. I studied engineering because how many immigrants in the room?
Do it. Go for it.
Immigrant kids, right? Like doctor, lawyer, engineer. These are your options, I see eyes rolling all over. Yeah, so I wanted to be an artist, but my parents made it very clear they did not bust their asses to bring me to this country so that I could be an artist. And so doctor, lawyer, engineer were the options. Doctor, lawyer didn't feel right. I was very into the environment, and so I decided to study environmental engineering. That's what I studied. I was finishing up that. I had gotten into a cartography master's program at CU Boulder, and I was in the process of doing that when living in Boulder, my only form of transportation was a motorcycle. Long story short, I go back home to visit the family in Colombia over the holidays. I get into a wreck. I crash that motorcycle. I come back to school in January, and now again, my only form of transportation is a motorcycle, and I have a bum knee and a bum wrist. So I go. I can't ask my parents for help because my parents do not know that I have a motorcycle. I followed their advice most of the time, but not that one. I go to the dingiest, dirtiest, saddest looking little used car dealership in the lot in Boulder, Colorado, and I ask the guy if he would trade for half of the value of the cheapest car he's got on the lot. So I basically have enough to pay for half of a car. And for the other half, I say, I'll make you a website. Because it's 1996, and only the big dealerships have websites, and this little tiny dingy used car dealership does not. To my surprise, the guy says yes. I make him a website. I'm 20 years old. I don't know what I'm doing, but I make him a website because I'm an engineer. And in my classes with my fellow students, we were all self-teaching each other HTML. And at that point, ASP and some database backend for the Athena digital design people in the room. I know you're here. And so I make him a website. He's super happy. He tells a friend down the street who owns another dealership. And fast forward, I ended up having a tech startup at the age of 20, making big, robust websites for large corporations like the Weather Channel, like Janus Funds, like Colorado Lottery. So that's kind of how it all started. And honestly, it wasn't to me about gender parity. It wasn't about women in STEM. It wasn't about women in engineering. It was just like necessity and being scrappy and asking. And, to my surprise, having people say yes. It wasn't until later that it really became a thing for me, when I started to realize that I keep consistently being the only woman in the room, and the company gets bigger, and there's actually fewer of us. And being in it, I didn't realize what was happening. Now, in hindsight, we look at the stats and we know that women today, half as many women are graduating in engineering as when I was starting. And so, I didn't know it. When you're in it, you're in it. But I saw that. I saw the thinning of the ranks, right, throughout my career. And 15 years later, 4 startups later, my last company, I did it as a joint venture with a publicly traded company called Lionbridge. It went well for the company. I never really learned this work-life balance myth that we talk about. And so I wasn't very good at that. 15 years in, I was exhausted. We had 70,000 people in 42 countries, 5,000 people directly on the operation. And I was running a $100 million business and I wasn't happy. And so I left thinking that I was just exhausted, but it wasn't until I left and landed here that I started to realize that what was really wrong with my experience for those 15 years was the gender question. It was being the only woman in the room. It was being the only Latina usually in the building. It was all of those things combined, right? And I think that I had to sort of be out of it in order to really see that. And then what really drove the point home for me, when I really realized that this was a problem and I had been sort of not conscious of it, was when I had students at Barnard, students at Athena, saying in their wisdom, right, they would look at my LinkedIn, they would look at my bio, and they would come to our offices and say, Nathalie, you're obviously a tech pro, help me get a job at Google, help me get a job at Microsoft, help me get into tech. And it was just like putting a knife in my stomach. I was like, I just fled. Why would you want to go back into this world that I just escaped? And it was really that. It was realizing 15 years later that I had spent over a dozen years in a world and I had left it no better than I found it. And now there was this whole new generation of brilliant, amazing women who I wanted nothing but the best for. And I didn't have the stomach to send them back. And I didn't have the stomach to send them back because I knew that it was worse. I knew that 15 years later, it was worse than when I started. And I knew that I had picked too few battles and that I hadn't contributed to stopping it. And so that's why my mom calls tech Hotel California, that like you can check out, but you can never leave, like that ridiculous lyric. So I'm back. I'm back. Not necessarily because I love it, but because I feel like I need to, except that I'm back now in a very different way. I'm back in that I give speeches, I make people uncomfortable, I say things they don't want to hear. I tell people that, they can't have sausage fests if I'm around. I tell people, like people across the street, that they can't host sausage fests on our campus. I do all sorts of things that I didn't do when I was in my 20s for all sorts of reasons. But I'm back, but in a very different way now.
Right. But let's also unpack that a little bit more. You were the only woman of color there, only Latina. How did your identities navigate that career and leadership journey? And what would you tell your former self? You keep saying that tech is worse off than it was. What would you recommend for those of us that want to go in there and honing in on this new revolution of women entrepreneurs?
Right. What I don't know that I had a great answer for that until last summer. Not this summer, sorry, the summer of 2017, when young women who were following in my footsteps, right, starting their companies in tech, working with VCs, the first few, when the story broke, summer of 2017, that they were not only calling out a VC for shitty behavior, sorry, recording, but they were naming names, and they took a VC down. And that was just the beginning, right? And a lot of other people named names, and a lot of other people got taken down, and more to be taken down. But that was really the moment when I realized we went through the exact same thing with the exact same guys, or the earlier generation of those same guys. And we each, I can only speak for myself, believed that we were the only ones. And we lived in silos, and we suffered in silence. And had we just talked to our other sisters, had we just built alliances, had we realized the power in numbers that this generation of women have realized, we would have stopped this 20 years ago. And I've talked to women older than me who say, sister, we would have stopped this 30 years ago. But whatever, we would have stopped it sooner. And it was because we didn't understand the power in those alliances, or maybe we believed that we were alone. I'm pretty sure that many times I thought that I was the only person this was happening to. And I think that would be my advice to younger self, and that would also be my advice to the current generation, right? Although I don't know that they need much advice because they seem to be handling it just fine. But more of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Under that same line, LEAPFROG provides a lot of advice and strategies for women to succeed as entrepreneurs. For the young women in the room here today, what are some of the 1 or 2 hacks that you would recommend for us to look into?
Well, Random House was very good to me. I can honestly say I made no compromises. There was one compromise, and it was for good reason, and that was I wanted to call the book Shortcuts, or I wanted the word shortcuts somewhere in the title or in the cover of the book, because let's be really honest, the book is shortcuts. The book is 50 shortcuts for how you can take down the patriarchy and circumvent the status quo. Like, that is absolutely what it is. And 50 plus examples of women like Elise Schuster and men and so many other people across the spectrum of gender and race and everything who have done it. So that you don't just have somebody's advice on how to do this, but you have a template. You have an example of one or two people who have actually done it who you can copy. But we tested the word shortcuts.
I remember that.
Yeah.
The poll. Mm-hmm. The infamous poll.
Yeah. It was really disconcerting for me, but it's okay. What we learned is that women, especially women of color, but women generally, and men of color actually as well, and for that matter, nice men, because the people who responded to the poll were like men, women of color. Anyway, but a group of people who I suppose is predictable, all equated the word shortcuts with cheating. Meanwhile, I'm fueled and motivated to write this book because the World Economic Forum wrote a study that said that it's going to take 170 years to get to gender parity, and guess what?
We don't have 170 years.
We don't have 170 years, and how, I'm sorry, other than shortcuts, do you have any ideas about how we do this? So here we have a whole group of people who are my target audience who are having a visceral response to the word shortcut, and yet shortcuts are the only way that we're going to shrink that 170-year timeline. And so that was the compromise that I made, but it was for good reason. You know, it's funny because they gave me my own line. There's a hack called the Red Hot Trojan Horse, because I'm saying basically sometimes you have to Trojan horse your way into a room, and you have to, you know, give people something that looks palatable, you know, as a disguise for the actual sort of medicine that's needed, right? And so what they said is, you know, you're not going to fight that battle on the cover of a book. People look at the cover of a book for 2 seconds, and they decide if they're going to buy it or not. They see the word shortcuts. If that's the response, that's the response. You can't change that, Natalie. So stick it in the book. So I ended up putting my rant in the introduction, and basically saying, guess what? This book is about shortcuts. Get over it. But the hacks, in terms of some of my favorite hacks, to your question, there's a hack called, I will bleep myself. Should I bleep myself? Bleep the friends and family round, because I think that words matter. I think the idea that in finance we call a formal stage in the evolution of a startup, right? You start with a seed round. That tends to be the first thing that you do. Then you get your friends and family, or you do it the other way around. But either way, these are actual structured fund rounds. And then you get your A, and then you get your B, and you go down alphabet soup. But there's and you can look it up, you can look in books, you can look online. There is actually something called the friends and family round. It's defined, it's got, you know, very structured ideas around what it means and how it works. And startup founders are required to do that before they can proceed into the next stage of funding. And to me, the idea that an entire industry seems to have forgotten that the average American does not have $5,000 in their savings account, and the fact that the average American, and especially women of color, do not have friends and family who can write them hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of checks to start their companies, and that they ignored all of that and still called this the friends and family round, is just a symptom of that larger problem, right? Of this group of people who are so disconnected from reality that they've had, you know, the gall to call something the friends and family round. So it's called Fuck the Friends and Family Round. Even in the audiobook, they let me say that. Then they bleeped me. That's okay. As my nephew says, it makes me sound more gangster.
Or OG, the OG.
Totally. But what they really mean is they mean, do you have traction? Do people care about your product? Do they care about enough of it that they, do they care enough to buy it, to put money out? And so there are other ways to do that. Other ways to do that include crowdfunding. Crowdfunding the traditional route where you're giving people samples of your product or you're giving people t-shirts in exchange for whatever, or the new form of crowdfunding that's possible because of the Jobs Act where you can do equity crowdfunding and actually give people a piece of your company. All of those, lines of credits, loans, competitions. There's a woman in Atlanta who started a company that takes packaged foods that have to be disposed of and that large companies or even campuses, right, have to pay people to dispose of. And she created an Uber-like system for truckers. Instead of leaving sites like, say, for example, the Atlanta airport empty, they leave with all of this packaged food that would have otherwise be disposed of.
Are we talking about Gooder?
Yes.
I worked with Gooder this week.
Really?
This weekend. What am I talking?
This summer?
This summer, I worked with Gooder. They're one of the up-and-coming startups in Atlanta and all about sustainability. And the founder is a woman of color.
Yeah, and she funded her company, the first stage of it, because she is amazing at pitching, and she went all around the country winning every pitch competition she could possibly get into, and that's how she funded her company. So that chapter, that hack, is basically full of these alternative ways to fund your company and basically still effectively do what is called, I won't call it that, but the friends and family run, but do it your way. Do it via crowdfunding. Do it via all these other ways. And by the way, women are disproportionately more successful at crowdfunding than men. So we know that we're successful in this category. Let's double down on it. Let's do more of it, right? So that's one of my favorites. What else? I'll think of more. But I have to say that's absolutely one of my favorites, because I think that what it does is it fundamentally tells you there's more than one path to get there, even though we're all fed one path and we're told that you have to get VC. There's another one, which is playing your women card. Right. Which I love. It features another Latina, Nina Vaca. If you talk to just about any VC, they will tell you that, there are other ways to get funding. Sure, you can crowdfund. Sure, you can go around the country and win a bunch of competitions. But if you're really serious about your company and you really want to scale, and you want to scale fast, the way that the unicorns do, you got to get VC. That is, I can almost record my voice and just because you will hear it, that line multiple times. To them, I say, okay, Nina Vaca starts her company 15 years ago. It is now the fastest growing woman-owned company in America. They are about to hit $1 billion in revenues. She never took a penny of outside equity capital. And so for anybody that tells me that you can't go big and you can't grow fast, I say Nina frickin' Vaca. Right? And there are tons of examples like that of people who've taken different approaches. But the way that she did it was by going into the vendor diversity programs of large corporations and getting deals with AT&T, with Comcast, with all sorts of big corporations who needed technology staffing, and loudly and proudly waving her woman card and waving her Latina card too, and saying, you need diversity in your supply chain, you need to give me that contract. And that's essentially how she built her business and how she retains her business now.
Yeah, we're a fan of Nina. She's based in Texas, which is also, a weird place to be a woman and to be Latina. But, let's play that woman card, the Latina card, the woman of color card. And with that, we often hear about women wanting it all, or hashtag the hustle. In fact, these are often things that are glamorized but are not necessarily healthy. Today's actually World Mental Health Day. Can you share a little bit about how you mindfully prioritize and practice self-care to prevent burnout? Because a lot of us want to go from 0 to 100 real quick, but self-care is an important thing, and being mindful about what you're doing is only the right thing to do when you're running a business.
So you and Molly and a few others who have actually worked, directly with me know that I'm not always the best at this, but I am aware of it, and I do try to create structures, and having had the experience of really burning myself out. So I tell the short version of the story when I talk about leaving tech after 15 years. The slightly longer version, I won't all the way go into it, but I had massive adrenal failure. That's why I left tech after 15 years. I worked myself to the point of having basically no immune system. And I had a great doctor who was both naturopathic and Western medicine, MD, who basically said, this is stress related. And my response, because I love to fix things, was oh, great, no problem, I'll take a vacation. I'll fix it. And she was like, no. And she shows me this chart of sort of where my adrenals are and then where normal adrenal glands are. And she said, this is so far off what's normal and what's healthy. This is not something that you can fix with a 2-month vacation. You need to change your freaking life. Which is when, I think for whatever reason, I must have been ready to hear that. Because I proceeded to sell everything, house, motorcycle, car, stuff. I had a bunch of handlers. I didn't even know why. Like, someone walked my dog, somebody did this, somebody did, that was never what I aspired to. I simplified my life. I moved to the one place in the world where I feel the least stressed, which will come as a surprise to some of you, but not others, which is Manhattan. I know, this is my natural rhythm. Seattle, which is where I was based for 11 years, was a little stressful for me because I found myself sort of shaking everyone awake. My choice. It's not that Seattle is stressful. I made it stressful for myself. And so I made that decision. But the thing is, that's a big dramatic thing, right? You can't like kill your body for 15 years and then be like, aha, I'm going to take a sabbatical and I'm going to move someplace that moves me and I'm going to take a couple years off. It turned into more than a couple years. But and by off, I mean coming to the Athena Center, going to school at Columbia, and but that was off. But what I did learn is that now I create structures to prevent that, right? And so you who have worked with me know that before 10 a.m. is sacred for me. I do not work before 10 a.m. Before 10 a.m. is my meditation time. It's my time to walk my dog time. I'm an night owl, so if I was up late, it's also just my sleep in and nobody bothers me time, whatever. But that's really important to me. The app Zeal, to be able to order up a massage in my living room in the middle of the night if I want to, has become my best friend. Not everybody can afford that, but these are the sorts of things that I just sort of incorporated. And there's a hack in the book where I talk about taking daily vacations, because an entrepreneur doesn't have 2 weeks. There's no corporation saying, here's, take 3 weeks off and go on a vacation paid. Entrepreneurs don't have that. And by entrepreneur, I mean artist, I mean freelancer, I mean all of those different words that people use. Yeah, to call themselves something other than what they are, which is entrepreneurs. People with side hustles, like all of us, who do 2, 3, 4 things at once. And so I think that, we live in a world that isn't structured for health. We live in a world, certainly if you're moving up the corporate ladder, the reason, in my opinion, that women leave before they get to those C-suite jobs is because they get that close to seeing what that C-suite job actually entails. They see what it had for breakfast. They see how often it sees their kids. They see how it lives, eats, breathes, and they say, no, thank you. I don't want that job. Even though I might have been working for it my whole life, now I got close enough to touch it, and actually, I'm not that interested. And I think that that's why we have the massive drop-off. So even in those environments where you do have 3 weeks paid vacation, they're still not really designed for health or for families or for all these different things that normal life bring. So I think you have to create these sort of structures. And in my case, it's very much. It's about taking a daily vacation. It's about stopping when a meeting cancels and I could squeeze in another meeting or I could squeeze in a little more work. But I'm downtown where there are all these great foot massage places. Maybe when that meeting cancels, I get a foot massage instead, right? These are the sort of things that I do to try to prevent from getting where I was in 2010, in 2009, when, I had basically driven myself to sickness. So,
thank you. Yeah, I think it's evident. And you coming to Manhattan is, not everyone's immediate thought. I think I might have probably thought Oklahoma or something for a sabbatical. Beach somewhere. A beach, but to each his own. You talked about how, systems weren't made for women, mothers, women of color. We've talked extensively about how the ways that we can change the system, but what can we do to change the system itself? What are some programs, policies that we can think of to implement, impact, and get to gender parity? So I have respect for people who, for example, Sheryl Sandberg, who believes that she can do something with corporations and tell people to lean in and do all of the things that she does. I'm not a specialist at things related to corporate. I know what I know, which is entrepreneurship.
And I have chosen to dedicate my life not to bank on the Procter & Gamble's or the Googles of the world changing their fundamental way of being, which is, if somebody believes that they can do that, fantastic. I don't. I believe that I would rather put my money, my energy, my time behind the next Google, Procter & Gamble, Uber, and hope and make sure, actually, not hope. Hope is not a strategy.
It's not a word in our vocabulary.
Yes. And make sure that the founders of those new entities are women, and that they're or people who are aware and conscious and conscientious of the fact that the system isn't working for us. And so I'm much more of a build new systems, build new structures sort of way of thinking. And that's another reason why I've become a full-time investor. I have to tell you, after being subjected to venture capital my entire adult life, I would never have guessed that I would have been on this side of the table. This seemed like the last possible place. My CFOs were my least favorite employees, and I guarantee you I was their least favorite person. And so it's weird for me to have gone to a male-dominated environment like tech to the world of finance. Like you would think I'm just sort of a glutton for punishment, but I do think that this is how we change the system, right? We know, for example, and this is something that nobody likes to hear, the field of gender lens investing, which I'm in, right, is not new. Even though the headlines and all of the talk about investing in women have become really hot over the last few years, the reality is there have been firms focused on investing in women for at least the last 10 or 15 years, right? This is not a new concept. It's just become more popular in the last couple of years. And so we have 10 or 15 years of track record that we can study and that we can see. And as you know, because you were at Brava, we did this study. Mm-hmm. And after we did it, then Wharton did it last year, and it's called Project Sage. Right. And they cataloged all of the funds and all of the platforms that focus on investing in women. At last count, Wharton's Project Sage put us at 58.
50, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I remember that.
So it's 58 of us. And yet, we went from 5% venture capital going to women-led businesses to 2.5% this last year. And most importantly for me, 0.2% of venture capital goes to women of color, which tells me, and the studies prove this out, that women investing in women are doing the exact same thing that the men in Silicon Valley, who we always malign, do, which is that they're pattern matching. And so what you have is a whole generation of 10 to 15 years worth of white women investing only in other white women. And that's why the number is what it is, and that's why it's not climbing. And so for me, I think the way that we change the system is to take it over, right? We need more women of color investing. We need to acknowledge that people pattern match, even with the best of intentions. I highly doubt that a lot of my colleagues who set out to support women set out with some Machiavellian, intent to only invest in other white women, but that's ultimately what they did. And so what we need to be doing is we need to put more people of color in charge of investing, and then we need to think, about the systems that investors function in. So for example, me as a full-time investor, I can only grow to, say, a fund or a platform of $50, maybe $75 million of capital to deploy. In the big scheme of things, $50 to $75 million of investing is not going to change the world. The people who change the world, the people who are the biggest funders to nuclear armament, like BlackRock, are working to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Right. The only way a firm like mine gets to the $1 billion and above mark is by working with institutions. And those institutions are pension funds, they're endowments like the Barnard and the Columbia endowments. They are massive sources of capital like those. And all of those big sources of capital have what are called emerging manager programs. And if you read about them, they are a thing of beauty. If you
They're glamorized.
Oh, they're so beautiful. They're like, CalSTRS, CalPERS, right? Billions and billions of dollars worth of people's pensions. And they have designed these programs to bring more women and people of color into the fold, to invest in women-led and diverse-led funds, because up until now, all fund managers on the private and on the public side have been white male. And yet, when you look at the last 10 or 15 years, again, of the success or the failure of these emerging manager programs, they have failed. They have failed completely because
And let's talk about that.
Yeah. So the reason they have is for something that seems like it's not gendered and seems like it's not race-oriented at all. It's just numbers. It's just, hey, you know, we at Goldman Sachs have a limited team, and so we can't be placing and funding funds that are 15, 20, 50 million in size. So emerging managers, in order to qualify for our programs, you must have a minimum of 100 million on your balance sheet to qualify as an emerging manager. Another company I spoke to recently, you must have a minimum of 300 million on your balance sheet as a first-time fund manager in order to qualify for their emerging managers program. And so who has that? I'll give you an example. Tag Romney, Mitt Romney's son, his first fund was a $300 million fund. Good for him.
Demographic, white male.
Also, first-time fund manager. Guess who qualified for the emerging manager programs that year? Tag Romney. Because daddy picked up the phone and called all of his friends at all of the different places and raised him $300 million. And you know what? To his credit, he did well. The fund performed well. 2/3 of the fund was actually just funded in other people's funds, so it wasn't really up to him. But 1/3 of the fund, 100 million of the 300, was his thesis. He proved it out, it worked well, and now that he's working on his second fund, it's going to be even bigger. If his first one was 300, I don't even know what size the next fund is going to be, right? Maybe he'll get to $1 billion. But the point is it seems like it's just an efficiency, it's just, you know, this pretty benign requirement, and yet it is absolutely by design keeping people who are starting funds out of the picture if they're women, if they're people of color, if they didn't, you know, just grow up, you know, and have the sort of connections and the cultural capital that allows you to raise 300 million in your first round. So that's the sort of thing that I'm looking at. And in order to do that sort of thing, you know, pension funds for if you're, you know, in a public pension, right, if you're teachers in California, that comes with legislation, right? CalSTRS, for example, I always get them confused. I can't remember if it's CalSTRS or CalPERS, but the teachers' pension just got the very first woman on their board this last year, my friend, the Honorable Nora Vargas. And she was governor appointed. And it's baffling to me to think that the majority of teachers in California are Latina, and that nobody until last year thought it would be a good idea to have a Latina on the board of the multi-billion, if not hundreds of billion, I can't remember, tens of billion at least, pension fund. So basically nobody thought it would be a good idea to have a Latina on the board of the organization that manages the money of mostly Latina teachers, right? It's those sorts of things that we need to have happen. And it's those sorts of systems and structures that I think are going to really move the dial. And they're not the kind of thing that you hear about and talk about every day. They're not as sexy as the headlines about how we funded Spanx or we funded, you know, some app that teaches you how to pick your lipstick color. Like, it's not that. It's a lot more subversive, and it's intentionally, in my opinion, opaque. And I want to be talking more about this stuff, right?
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, I certainly didn't know a lot about this space before I, you know, knew Nathalie. People like Arlan Hamilton, people like Nathalie Molina, and people like Natalia Noguera are those that really put their money where their mouth is and support women. And I think too, like, consumers, we ourselves are, you know, people who buy and consume things. We should also be ethical in deciding where we're, you know, putting our money in and who we're investing in, because even at the micro level, a lot of micro interactions are happening, and those too have an impact.
Micro interactions are purchases as consumers, but also all of us touch things that have the ability to move large forms of capital, right? Be it the endowment at the school that you're attending, be it the 401k that you're putting into in your first job. All of those things make you a part of a group of shareholders and a contingency of people who can make noise and who can at the very least ask the question. I can tell you straight up that I have gotten calls from organizations who have emerging manager programs. I got one recently from a group called Colonial. One of the biggest community foundations in the world, if not the biggest, is the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. It's a foundation where new billionaires whose companies, or millionaires whose company just sold for, you know, 300 million or something, when they don't know what to do because, you know, they don't understand the tax structures and they suddenly have all this money, where do they put it? They park it at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So they are swimming in money that they don't even know what to do with. And they outsource the fund manager business to a group called Colonial. Colonial has had clients calling them up and saying, how diverse is your fund manager cohort? And because of those phone calls, I get a phone call So it doesn't matter how small your percentage of something is. If you're a part of that community, again, be it a 401k, be it a pension plan, be it an endowment, these things matter and your voice matters. And the idea that you might call and be like, how many women do you have in your fund manager cohort? How many people of color? Those things start to really resonate, and they have a direct effect on people like Arlen Hamilton and Natalia and Lo Tony and Denmark West. These are all fund managers who are people of color, who are women, who are out there struggling to get to where Tag Romney is.
Yeah, definitely. But the power of institutions, I think as a student, we get a lot of that here at Barnard, where we get the confidence, the boost, and the credentials to make those sorts of connections. But even outside of institutions, in our communities, we do have some things, some connections to leverage and really make an impact there.
Teachers in California.
So with that, all those notes and gems, let's open it up to a Q&A and see if, I'm sure you guys are swarming with questions. Can we get the mic? We've got a question here. Michelle? Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm from Columbia, too, by the way.
Hi, Michelle. Columbia, the university, or Columbia, the country?
The country.
Okay.
I'm just really curious. I think you explained it a little bit, and I'm sure the book explains it much more. But there is there's a reasoning that when the economy is created right now, or our system is created by men, which means that it's benefiting. It's basically the people who are creating it. It's mostly benefiting men, basically. So what are your thoughts, and why did you make the decision of only investing in companies that benefit women in terms of consuming products, and not investing in women founders? Mm-hmm. If you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me first start by saying I believe in the thesis of investing in women entrepreneurs, and it's why I wrote the book. I hope that having started a Center for Women Entrepreneurs, my chops in that department, are pretty easy to defend. But what I saw was a hole in the market. I looked around, and again, at what now became Wharton's Project Sage, and I saw what everybody who was investing in women was doing, right? And I saw some of the things that I didn't like the fact that women of color weren't getting any piece of that. But I also worried that the nature of the companies that I was seeing invested in. I have seen companies with the app that tells you what color lipstick to wear, the new version of Spanx, the box that, if I get another pitch for some tampon delivery service, I will shoot myself. Sorry if there's anybody here who has founded a tampon delivery service. And what I was worried about was, where are the solutions to the really big problems? Where's the vaccine to keep breast cancer from coming back? Where is, the really, really big, seemingly intractable problems? I wasn't seeing the solutions to those. And I was also thinking this. I won't name names, and I didn't name names in the book, but I was in a fireside chat with another fellow investor who had invested in 60 companies, only women founders, and not a single one of them was a founder of color. And I thought, okay, girlfriend probably has some bias issues, yes, but it can't only be that. And I won't blame it on the pipeline, because I don't believe that there's a pipeline issue. For those that are not familiar with the stats, women are starting more companies than men in the United States. And of those companies, 8 out of every 10 women-led business is started by a woman of color. So we do not have a pipeline issue. But what we do have is we have 98% of all of those women-led businesses stuck at the less than $1 million a year mark. So we have a problem of scale. And I'm thinking, well, okay, so women of color don't need any help deciding to become entrepreneurs and launch businesses, but they do need help getting over the $1 million mark. They do need help thinking of themselves as the sort of business that you invest in and turn into a $1 billion business the way that Nina did. And I started to think of what are the things that prevent them from doing that. And to me, it seemed pretty clear that it's the fact that we're in survival mode, right? We are barely making ends meet. We do not have the friends and family that can write those big checks. We do not have the $50,000 savings account that we can invest in our own company. And then we also don't have the connections with the free lawyer, with the buddy that works at Coca-Cola that can get you your first deal. Like we don't have that sort of cultural capital either. And I thought, well, how do we fix that? And I'm thinking, okay, well, the way that we fix that is by building businesses that put money into the wallets of women, right? And so I'll give you an example. There's a company called Honor that is based in San Francisco that is a company that essentially takes elder care professionals, puts them on a platform. They're vetted, they're insured, they're super sexy the way that it's all presented to you so that you really trust the people that you're hiring, and then you hire them to come to your home and take care of your elder family member, right? Well, what we know about the elder care workforce is that it's mostly women of color, and we also know that they make 12 to 13 bucks an hour in most metropolitan areas in the United States. They make 12 to 13 bucks an hour and they don't get benefits. What Honor is doing is they're hiring them for 20 bucks an hour and giving them benefits. Now, I don't give a rat's ass if Honor doesn't have a female founder. Honor has built a model that is going to take, depending on how quickly they grow and how many cities they go to, with 10,000 people turning 60 every day in this country, they have the potential to take hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of women who are mostly women of color, and take them from 12 bucks with no benefits to 20 bucks with benefits. They're not going to turn any of those women into billionaires, but I don't care. They're taking potentially hundreds of thousands of women out of survival mode and into a place where they can afford an education for their kids, for themselves, and maybe even the ability to start their own companies and grow their own companies, right? So that was my thesis. It's not that I don't agree with the idea of investing in women. It's just that I see a whole bunch of women being shut out, and I'm a systems thinker. And so I want to take an entire ecosystem of women to the tune of millions of them and take them out of survival mode and into the place where they can take over the economy. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. But I get heat for that. What do you mean? You're investing in women, but you don't actually require that it be a woman-led company? It's why our slogan at Brava is outcomes over optics. Everybody's worried about optics and what it looks like and getting nice little headlines that look nice on your annual report. I don't care about that. I care about results.
One of my favorite things of when you bring that up is like, I remember in one of your speeches you said, do you remember when Obama fixed racism? Or like when Myers at Yahoo fixed gender parity?
Or Margaret Thatcher achieved gender parity in the UK.
When did that happen? Outcomes over optics is the norm of what we do here. Questions?
Yes, beautiful red jacket.
We have.
You mentioned earlier that when women get close to the C-suite, they turn away. Men don't turn away. That's their goal from day one. Why is it that you think women don't feel that same kind of pull to that environment? And have you just given up on that? That women will not finally take control of some of these well-established companies and be able to redirect some of the revenue that they have and the foundations that they create?
Yeah, I don't believe that they don't have the pull. I actually think that women have just as much of the pull, and I think that when you look at the numbers, Microsoft was one of my biggest, in fact, for a long time, my biggest customer, and they spent many, many millions of dollars on getting women on the fast track to executive level positions. And to me, what answers do they have the pull as much as men is the sheer number, the sheer volume of women that wanted to be a part of those programs, which told me we have just as much of a pull as anyone else. But what I noticed and what they noticed, and Starbucks noticed something similar around that time, is that once they get up to a certain level, they may have the same drive and they may have the same pull and ambition to get to that C-suite, but they are working against a system that pushes them down in a very unique way that does not push the men down. They're working within a system where they have to deal with all of the things that we're talking about so actively right now, where I might be really ambitious and be ready for that C-suite position, but I'm also just not that happy about the level of harassment that I have to deal with on a daily basis. Naomi Wolf, who was here at the Athena Center with us for a year, she and I did a talk at Microsoft a few years ago. after the talk, as is often the case, right, there was a line of women standing there to talk to us and to mingle, and we spoke to each of them. We stayed until the very end. And within 15 minutes of going through that line, there were 2 women who told us stories about having to go to work every day at Microsoft with their stalker in the same building. One woman in particular talked about having a, what is it called, a restraining order. It had gotten that bad. He managed to sneak into someone's office and see the wedding invitation that she had distributed to her friends, crashed her wedding, and is in her wedding photos. And HR has not bothered to do anything about that problem. And so I think about the pull, and I think it's absolutely there, but the push of things like that, right, that make getting there so much harder.
So it's really the push that you were...
I do, and I think that
What
it's
do you
also...
think of Jerry Brown's legislation with the...
In California, mandating women on the board.
Director?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, because I focus so much on outcomes over optics, I see the optics of that. I see what it's doing. I love that it's galvanizing people. I'm sort of in wait and see mode. Like if it delivers the sort of results that we want to see, then I'll be the biggest supporter of legislation like that. I really hope it does. But yeah, I look at environments like these corporate environments, and I just see that. By the way, I don't know that all men answer the call. I know a lot of men who don't answer the call because they care about being a good dad, they care about spending time with their family. And so I think it's only a certain kind of man who can, or even, I met a woman who was an executive at one of the big banks here in New York City, and she was telling me that she's only one of 6 women executives in the entire massive corporation, and that of the 6, she's the only one that has a working husband. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but what that tells me is that the only way that you can make that work, and she's sort of the exception to the rule, is by having that sort of a setup. And the other 5 have it, and she doesn't, and it was particularly hard for her, right? And she was thinking about what her next step was going to be, and she was thinking of becoming an entrepreneur and doing something different. But that's an example of somebody who managed to get there, but I don't know how long she'll be there, because it's just not welcoming, right? So, yeah, I don't know that I've given up. I just find more hope in the idea that the next big corporation might be women-led, might be led by people who are more conscientious and who can build executive suites that are more welcoming to human beings who care about family and life. And I feel like the fastest path, when I see the trajectory and the growth of a company like Pinnacle, like Nina Vaca's company in Texas, right, that got to $1 billion within much less than 15 years. It happens to be 15 years old. And I think if we can have a few more Pinnacles, if we can have the next Google be the sort of place that's welcoming to people who care about having a full life, then we might be able to see the executive suite generally in corporate change. But the idea of going to Procter & Gamble or going to Google or going to Uber and saying, your system is broken, can we please fix it? Travis? Everybody who knows me knows Travis can kiss my, what. But I haven't used Uber in years because of that. But I don't have a lot of hope in those organizations shifting their culture. I guess I have more hope in creating new cultures, if that answers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have a question? Yes.
Right behind.
Hi.
Hi.
So, I'll sit.
You're welcome to stand. I can't see you very well, so that's a great idea.
So this is related to outcomes and results. How do you measure that the companies you're investing in are actually benefiting women?
Yeah.
And if you find that some of the companies aren't performing as well as you would like, how does that impact your strategy going forward?
Thank you. That's a great question. Impact investing is notorious for having a hard time measuring impact, right? And what impact means to you means, it means something totally different to someone else. At the risk of sounding overly simplistic, I am not, for example, even though I do think that my thesis affects this, my thesis is not climate change, where the nuance and the measurement and the work that goes into measuring whether something's really moving the dial, for example, on the carbon footprint, is a lot more complicated. In my case, it's really simple. It is a question of looking at whether the company is actually putting more money into the wallets of either their consumer base or their workforce. And in either case, it has to be at scale. So if a company comes to me, for example, and says, we have a factory and it's 50 women and we pay them really well and we have, great benefits and, all other women in the industry are working under these horrible conditions, but our 50 women have these advantages and blah, blah, blah. That's great, but that's 50 women. That's not impact at scale. Doesn't mean that's not a good investment. It just doesn't happen to meet my thesis. My thesis is about putting money into the wallets of women at scale. And so another example of a company that we've invested in, I didn't invest in Honor, by the way. I would have loved to. Honor closed their Series B right as Bravo was forming, so we missed that opportunity, but I have friends who've invested in it, and so that's why I'm somewhat familiar with the company. But a company that we did invest in is a company that it's in stealth mode, so I can't give you the name or the details, but I can give you the high level, which is that it's a company founded originally by 2 men. They've since added a female founder that is solving the problem of taking the birth control pill over the counter for the first time in history. And for those of you that are not aware of this, the birth control pill is not over the counter in the US or in any of the developed nations. So none of the G20, not Sweden, not France, not any of these more progressive places, none of them have the birth control pill over the counter. And the reason is because over the course, since the 50s, when the birth control pill was first created, over the course of the last many decades, because of mergers and acquisitions and consolidation, every single patent for every single birth control pill ever invented has fallen into the hands of the 4 biggest pharmaceuticals in the world. And even though I can't prove it and none of the experts in the industry can prove it, the general consensus in the industry is that they've made an agreement, which is the polite way of calling it. They've made an agreement because today you can only buy, for example, in the US, if you don't have health insurance, it costs between $50, and this audience probably knows this very well, it costs between $50 and $200 a pack for birth control pill. And there are women I know in my life who have great health insurance and whose copay is $50 or $60 a month. And so the pharmaceuticals have a pretty nice setup. Why would they go over the counter? When you know that drugs over the counter, the consumer tends to drive the price down. The morning after pill, for example, started at $70 a pill, right? And then it went down to whatever is now. I think it's like in the 40s. So why? Right? There's no economic reason for them to do that. And if we are successful, we will be taking the birth control pill over the counter, not just in the US, but in every one of the G20. And the measurement for that is very simple. 48% of all pregnancies in the United States, in the richest country in the world, are unintended. The economic impact of that on women, on their entire careers, on their trajectory, all of that, thankfully, people before us have measured. And so to take what would happen if we take a birth control pill and we remove the requirement for the prescription and we charge women less than what a typical copay costs, meaning like less than $20, to take and measure what that would do just top line immediately, never mind multi-generational wealth, never mind all of the other things that happen when women can control their reproductive health, it's pretty simple, and it's really an economic argument. It's what was the condition of the group of women that are being impacted before this product, and what is it after? If there's a significant enough delta and the number of women impacted is large enough, then that's a company I want to invest in. Does that answer? Yeah. Awesome.
And I think one thing to note about that is, developing countries, China, India, they have the birth control pill over the counter, and it's a question about autonomy. It's about economics. It's about just doing the right thing and the commonsensical thing to do. But, as we've seen, a lot of things that we think should be common sense are not so common to some people. But yeah, that's
and we've gotten used to it. I mean, especially in this country. I was talking to some students, not at Barnard, but in California, a woman was telling me that she got her IUD, but she still had her prescription for the birth control pill. So of course she continued to use the prescription for her roommate who didn't have health insurance and didn't have a way to get her birth control pill. And she just talked about it like it was the most normal thing. It's like we're hacking the system, and our moms before us hacked the system. And given how long the birth control pill's been around, our grandmas hacked the system. And we've just sort of gotten used to this, this ridiculous way of getting around the status quo to have our basic needs serviced. And so that investment is our single favorite investment. I literally wake up every morning because it is the biggest FU to the current administration that I could possibly think of. And when my friends, like Bob Bland, who is on the back of the book, are out, at the Supreme Court getting arrested over the last couple of weeks, and putting their bodies on the line, and I'm not good to anybody in jail right now, unfortunately. But we're all fighting the fight in our own ways. I say this in that speech where I talked about why we're giving money to Vote, Run, Lead. Part of this fight is fighting it on all fronts, right? And some of us are out there putting our bodies on the line, and some of us are back here funding that fight, and some of us are cooking the meals because, as Alice Walker says, revolution or not, we must eat. And so I think that all of that is really important, and measurement is a really important thing, because I worry about things that, like I said, look really nice in the headlines, but just aren't moving the dial. And I want more people to be Sharky like us. I want more people to kind of be no BS, like, show me the numbers. Are you really making an impact? Because I see a lot of things that are just pink and curly cute fonts and are not actually doing anything.
I think I saw a question in the back.
Sarah.
What are your opinions on the current state of
What are my feelings on the pink tax? Is that right?
the positive policies on the positive?
Oh, on parental leave.
And also, in your opinion, using companies to pay for women to please their ex.
Should companies pay for women to take parental leave?
Not to please their ex.
I missed the last part.
To please our ex.
Change our...
Not please your woman who might want to have kids or just
Can we answer the first part about parental?
I feel like I'm missing an important part, though. Sarah, you can... Oh, she's going to write it down? Or type? Mm-hmm. All right. I almost had it. Sorry, Sarah.
On that note, however, would you like to... I know you have strong thoughts on family and parental leave.
Yeah, yes. Thanks. So my feeling about that is just that it's a little bit like when, men want props because they babysat their child. Like, I feel like what I consider to be impactful, and certainly impact at scale, isn't that you run your company efficiently, isn't that you have just diversity in your leadership. That's self-serving. Like, we know that diversity in your leadership makes your company perform better. And of course, I want your company to perform better. So, like, the fact that you're doing things like that are proven to simply help the bottom line, to me, that's not, yay, now we've made the impact ranks. That's baseline, right? What are you doing above and beyond that to significantly make an impact, economic impact to women at scale? And so it's not that I don't care about those policies, it's just that I expect them by default. And I expect people to do above and beyond that with their core business models. And so, for example, as much as I love Patagonia, Patagonia give 1% of their proceeds to the earth. Yvonne Chouinard wrote that book, Let My People Surf. It's a brand that I love. It stands for something, and I like that. But if that was all they did, tomorrow they could stop giving 1% for the earth, and tomorrow they could stop letting their people surf, and they would still make jackets, and they would still do just fine. And so what I want is companies who, by virtue of the core business model, they're making an impact. It's not one of these addendums. It's not one of these sort of add-ons. Like, somebody has a really great parental leave, great, but if they shut that off tomorrow, are they going to go out of business? No. So it's not really core to the business. It's not that I don't care about it. It's just that it
should be there by default.
Yeah, exactly.
The other part of her question was about freeze eggs.
Oh. Yeah. Well, no, you got me from left field with that one. That's why I didn't know. Okay, thank you, Sarah. I have to tell you that I've come around on that one, and I'm gonna disclose a moment that some of you in the audience won't be surprised with. I had a little bit of a jerk moment where somebody came to me with a company saying, we're democratizing access to freezing eggs, and my response was a knee-jerk, perhaps not very thoughtful response of saying, thank you, but I don't work on companies that solve first world problems. Goodbye. And I dismissed it. It just didn't feel like one of those important ideas that I thought we needed to be solving. And then the person, thankfully, pushed back on me and said, actually, Nathalie, I know you called this a first world problem and you said you weren't interested, but think about who gets to afford freezing their eggs. Think about who gets to plan their pregnancies to that level of detail. Think about who gets to take that job and, or take that promotion because they know with certainty that they'll be able to postpone having those children. And think about who doesn't. And think about how expensive these things are and who gets, basically locked out of that formula. And immediately I ate my words, and of course I've changed my mind. And I do think that those are really important policies. And I do think that women in leadership are important. And when that leadership excludes, or the trajectory excludes, the people who can't afford things like that, then we have a problem. So I've come around. I didn't initially think it was important, but I do think it is very. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
And a couple last...
One. Oh, okay. Yes.
Shade? Mike is coming your way.
Running right at you.
So this might be, I think this is on. No, hello? I know, I think you guys can hear me. So I think my question is a little more sentimental.
Try it again.
Hello?
Yes.
Yay, beautiful. So I think my question is a little more sentimental. I think that entrepreneurship is a beautiful field, and I think as a woman, there's like a lack of self-esteem that is kind of apparent in the ways that women are moving. Mm-hmm. And from all of the hacks and all of the experiences and the women that you've met, I think I would like a top 3, like affirmative feelings or statements that you make to yourself while you're moving the way that you're moving.
Top 3 people, top 3 feelings.
Let's say feelings. More concentrated on you.
Okay, all right. First of all, I will beg to differ on the field qualification. I don't think of entrepreneurship as a field because I think that oftentimes what that means is people think doctor, lawyer, engineer, artist, entrepreneur. I disagree with that. I think entrepreneurship is a skill. It's a life skill. I think especially someplace like Barnard, where this is by default the reality, if you're going to be exceptional at whatever you do, chances are that's going to force you into the world of entrepreneurship at one point. Because if you're an exceptional doctor, you might start your own practice. If you're an exceptional attorney, you might decide to start your own practice as well. If you're an exceptional artist, who's your boss? Nobody, right? And so, who's Billie Jean King's boss, right? I had a conversation with her where she said, I don't know anything about entrepreneurship. And I was like, I'm sorry, Billie Jean King. I disagree. And so I think it's a life skill. I think it's like balancing your checkbook. It's like personal finance. It's a skill. It's a muscle that we all need to exercise, especially with employment being what it is now, that you can lose your employment at any time. And guess what? Lyft drivers are entrepreneurs, right? So, but in terms of my favorite, I would say that was just me vamping, by the way, coming up with my three. So, three favorite things. My abuelita, my grandmother, who brought my family to this country, she was already a grandmother. She was definitely older when she first came, and she was determined to bring her 5 adult children into this country, and over the course of 20 years, she did exactly that. And she did it on the budget of a seamstress in the sweatshops of Los Angeles. I don't know how. And part of the reason, the way that she did that is she would work nights and weekends, she would work extra, she would build is the right word, wedding dresses and quinceañera dresses for the local community, right? And that was her side hustle. And she would make beautiful things, and so I would stay up with her and I would read the newspaper, which was just her way of making sure I didn't forget to read Spanish. And I would keep her up and I would sit next to her, and one day, I was 8 or 9 years old, I start the book with the story, and I made the tragic mistake. I had no idea this was such a terrible thing, but I stopped and I said, "Abuelita, will you teach me to sew?" It seemed harmless enough. And she shut the machine off. She turned the chair over to me, and she looked at me the way that she has never looked at me in my entire life or since, and she was livid. And she said, "No, I will not teach you to sew because you will never make a living with your hands." I disagree with my abuelita. Doing work with your hands is honorable work, but I get what she was saying. She was saying it's your job to get us further than where we are, right? And so I think that's probably my favorite feeling. It's our job to get us further than where we are. It's our job to embrace the shortcut. It's our job to say, screw 170 years, right? The next generation need us to take shortcuts and to get over whatever issues we have. And the trauma that we collectively have about being the token woman in the room, of being the affirmative action candidate, of you only got this job because you're a woman, because you're brown, because you're this, because you're that, that is someone else's trauma. It is our job to get over it. And so I would say my second, did you want? My second favorite thing, which is an idea as well, is there's a leapfrogger in the book who is not an entrepreneur in the traditional sense, I suppose, but she's very much an intrapreneur within large corporations. She became the CEO of Cinnabon. She's one of my dearest friends. And now she's the president of the parent co that owns Cinnabon and Auntie Anne's and Carvel's, and now just bought Jamba Juice. She didn't finish her undergrad. And she saw herself moving up the ranks in Cinnabon and saw that she was on her way to the C-level and said, "I'm probably not going to get the CEO job without so much as a bachelor's degree." So she said, screw that. She went to Georgia Tech and she said, "Let me into your MBA program, even though I don't have an undergrad." Because she's just cheeky like that. And they did, and later on, she got her MBA and she became CEO of Cinnabon, and now she's president of the parent company and, running the world. So,
shout out to Kat Cole.
Kat Cole. Yeah, that's my girl, Kat Cole. The ethos around somebody having big enough ovaries to go to Georgia Tech and say, "I don't have a bachelor's, not my problem." I love that. That's, and then I would say the third one is a Barnard alum. It's Lita Orzek. Lita and her partner, Gail, have been running their company for 40 years and have been so careful about the culture that they build that the thought of selling it to someone, the thought of the exit strategy, which everybody tells you that you have to have if you're successful as an entrepreneur, right? I asked her, you remember this, I think, or Molly, I asked her like 2 years ago, because Lita is getting older. And I'm like, "Lita, what's your exit strategy? Like, this is a beautiful thing that you've built. What are you going to do?" And Lita, and I'm not going to bleep her, Lita said, "You want to know what my exit strategy is? This is my exit strategy." And I was like, "Oh my God, Lita, what are you doing? Like, you're going to have to figure out what your succession plan is. Like, who's going to take over?" I was super worried, and it turns out she had a plan. She just wasn't telling me what her plan was. Her plan was, on the 40th anniversary of Hanky Panky, how many of you know this story? Yeah, on the 40th anniversary of Hanky Panky, she gets all 170 employees. This is hack number 50. She gets together all 170 of her employees, she and Gail, and they all think they're going to celebrate their 40th anniversary. And instead, she announces her exit strategy, which is that she handed over the ownership of the entire company to all 170 employees. I know. That's not acquisition, that's not IPO, but that sure as hell is an exit strategy, and it's a beautiful one. And I think that feeling and that vibe of like, we keep being fed these formulas, we keep being told that this is how we function as entrepreneurs, and people like Lita and Kat, and for that matter, my grandmother, teach us that there are a million other ways, and they're honorable ways, and they're beautiful ways. And in this case, there are ways that are going to create, multi-generational wealth. Imagine the domino effect from 170 people who have worked their butts off for the last 40 years, who now own a thriving business, right? So those are my top 3.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I love that. Truly, like, I think it's a matter of like doing things on our own terms, like we've come enough far, we've really come far enough to look at all of the change that's happening and to put ourselves in perspective now. It's like, why not? We can do things on our own terms and like move the dial that way. Innovation's happening all the time, and just do it on your terms. What feels right to you, and fuck the status quo.
Oh, Melanie cursed. I've been working on that for years.
I never thought I could with you. I was like, she's my boss. But anyway, thank you so much, Natalie. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And now, to be in this space, in this very powerful space, and share the wealth, share the knowledge, and I'm just really excited that this is finally here. Pick up your copy. It's something that's so tangible. It's not your typical, business book, but it's something that, that has been tested. It's working. And I'm pretty sure there's maybe like a sequel to this.
Oh my God.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's like up to us. We can like work on new hacks and like keep it going and do things on our own terms, because this is the only way that we can like move the dial.
For those that are not aware, the Brava internship program that Melanie was a part of, the first intern was Aditi Somani, the second person was Melanie Palacios, is now named the Palacios Somani Fellowship Program at Brava. So I didn't name it after you guys for nothing, so you might have to take care of the sequel.
On that note, thank you guys.